Sebastian Moretti had built an empire on absolute control until his wedding night shattered everything he thought he knew about power. The marriage contract promised a strategic alliance, a partner who understood the brutal currency of their world. Instead, his bride arrived trembling, terrified, utterly unprepared for the dark bargain her family had made. At the altar, Lucia Ferraro's fear was so visceral it stopped him cold. And later, in their private suite, when her panic revealed a truth he hadn't anticipated, the most feared man in Chicago made a choice that would change both their lives forever. He walked away. The contract demanded consummation. Sebastian Moretti chose mercy instead. If this story captivates you, please hit the like button and comment with your city so I can see how far across the world this tale travels. Now, let's step into the dark, dangerous world of Sebastian and Lucia. The Ferraro family arrived 3 hours late to their own negotiation. Sebastian Moretti stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown Chicago office, 43 stories above a city that had learned long ago not to test his patience. The view stretched across the lakefront, a kingdom of steel and stone built on generations of Moretti power, Sicilian tradition, and the kind of influence that turned elected officials into puppets and competitors into cautionary tales. His reflection in the glass showed a man in his late 30s, tailored suit fitting his athletic frame like armor, dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples. Handsome in the way predators are handsome, all sharp lines and controlled danger. His eyes, nearly black in certain light, held the kind of cold calculation that had made him the youngest Don in the family's history. Behind him, his consigliere Marco Benedetti shifted uncomfortably in one of the leather chairs. "They're stalling," Marco said, his Boston accent clipping the words. "The Ferraros are desperate, but they're playing games. You want me to send a message?" Sebastian didn't turn from the window. "They'll come. Desperation has a timeline, and theirs just ran out." The marriage contract had been his father's idea, proposed 6 months before the old man's heart finally gave out. Vincenzo Moretti had recognized what Sebastian had been slower to see, that the traditional families were fracturing, that new players with tech money and political connections were encroaching on territory the Morettis had held for 3 generations. The Ferraros, despite their failing finances, still controlled shipping routes through the Great Lakes and had connections to East Coast operations that could prove invaluable. A marriage alliance would cement those connections, bring the Ferraro resources under Moretti protection, and send a clear message to anyone considering a move against either family. Sebastian had agreed because it made strategic sense. He'd expected negotiations with Antonio Ferraro, the aging patriarch, and perhaps his daughter, the one his sources said had studied international business at Georgetown, had worked in the family's import operations, understood the machinery of their world. He'd expected a partner who knew what she was signing up for. He'd expected someone like himself. The knock on the door came sharp and urgent. Marco rose to answer it, returning moments later with Sebastian's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia who'd worked for the family for 15 years. "They're here," she said, her tone carrying a note Sebastian couldn't quite identify. "But sir, there's something you should—" "Send them in." Patricia hesitated, which was unlike her, then nodded and disappeared. Sebastian finally turned from the window, adjusting his cufflinks with the deliberate calm of a man who controlled every room he entered. Marco took up position near the door, his bulk and silence a reminder of what happened to people who wasted Sebastian Moretti's time. When the door opened again, Antonio Ferraro entered first. The old man looked worse than Sebastian remembered from their last meeting 6 months ago. Thinner, grayer, with the defeated slope of shoulders that came from watching an empire crumble. His suit was expensive but outdated, his shoes polished but worn. Behind him came 2 men Sebastian recognized as Antonio's sons, Carlo and Dino, both in their 30s, both carrying the nervous energy of men who'd gambled everything and lost. And behind them, moving with the reluctance of someone being led to execution, came a young woman Sebastian had never seen before. She was small, maybe 5'4" in the modest heels she wore. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style that seemed designed to make her invisible. The black dress she wore was conservative, high-necked, long-sleeved, more appropriate for a funeral than a business meeting. Her hands clutched a small purse, knuckles white with tension. But it was her face that made Sebastian pause. She was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way. Delicate features, large dark eyes, full lips pressed into a tight line. But those eyes held something that triggered an instinct Sebastian had honed over years of reading people, of spotting lies and weaknesses and fears. Those eyes held terror, pure animal terror. "Mr. Moretti," Antonio began, his voice carrying false heartiness. "Thank you for your patience. Traffic was—" "Who is this?" Sebastian's question cut through the pleasantries like a blade. Antonio's smile faltered. "This is my daughter, Lucia, your bride, as per our agreement." "Your daughter's name is Isabella." Sebastian's voice dropped to the temperature of a Chicago winter. "Isabella Ferraro, 28 years old. Georgetown graduate, currently working as your operations director. I've seen her photograph." The silence that followed could have shattered glass. "Isabella is indisposed," Carlo spoke up, stepping forward with the desperate courage of a man with no options left. "There were complications. Lucia has agreed to honor the contract in her place." Sebastian's gaze never left the young woman. She hadn't looked up since entering the room. Her breathing was too fast, too shallow. One hand had moved to grip her opposite wrist, holding on like she might disappear if she let go. "How old is she?" 22, Antonio said quickly. "Of legal age, of sound mind, and look at me." The command wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Lucia's head lifted slowly, those terrified eyes meeting Sebastian's for the first time. The impact of that gaze hit him somewhere unexpected, not in the calculating part of his brain that assessed threats and opportunities, but somewhere deeper, somewhere he'd thought was dead. She looked at him the way people looked at natural disasters, at oncology diagnoses, at the moment they realized their world was ending. "Do you understand what this contract entails?" Sebastian asked her directly, ignoring the Ferraro men entirely. Her lips parted. No sound came out. She tried again. "Yes." The word was barely a whisper. "I don't think you do." Sebastian moved closer, watching her fight the instinct to step back. "This isn't a business partnership. This is a marriage alliance. It requires proximity, obligation. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Color drained from her already pale face. She swayed slightly, and for a moment Sebastian thought she might actually faint. "She understands," Antonio interjected, desperation making him bold. "Mr. Moretti, the contract your father and I negotiated was for Isabella." Sebastian finally looked at the old man, and Antonio took an involuntary step back from what he saw there. "You're trying to substitute one daughter for another like they're interchangeable assets. Tell me why I shouldn't end this meeting and this arrangement right now." "Because you need us as much as we need you." Carlo's voice shook but held firm. "The shipping routes, the East Coast connections, the political leverage, none of that changed. The alliance is still valuable. The alliance was predicated on a specific arrangement with a specific person. Lucia is a Ferraro," Dino added. "The contract specifies a Ferraro daughter. It's legally sound." Sebastian's laugh was cold and humorless. "You think I care about what's legally sound? I could make all of you disappear before lunch and have 20 lawyers swearing it never happened." Lucia made a small sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. Something shattered behind her eyes, resignation settling into the terror like oil on water. And that look, that absolute surrender to an inevitable fate, made something twist in Sebastian's chest. He'd seen that look before. On the faces of people who knew they were beaten, who'd given up fighting, who'd accepted that their lives were currency to be spent by more powerful people. He'd put that look there himself, more times than he could count. Seeing it on this young woman's face, this stranger who'd been dragged into his office like a sacrificial offering, felt different. "The wedding is scheduled for Saturday," Antonio said quietly, all pretense of confidence gone. 3 days from now. "Mr. Moretti, we understand this is irregular, but we are prepared to honor every aspect of the original agreement. Lucia will be a good wife. She'll do everything required of her. Everything." The emphasis on that last word made Lucia flinch. Sebastian studied her for a long moment, his mind calculating odds and angles the way it always did. The Ferraros were desperate, that much was obvious. They'd substituted daughters because Isabella had either refused or run, and they were banking on Sebastian accepting the change rather than walking away from valuable assets. They were probably right about that. The shipping routes alone were worth the inconvenience. The East Coast connections could prove crucial in the next 6 months, as he consolidated power against the Rinaldi family's encroachment. And a marriage alliance, regardless of which Ferraro daughter he took, would signal strength at a time when his enemies were watching for weakness in the wake of his father's death. It made strategic sense to proceed. But strategy didn't explain why he couldn't stop looking at Lucia's terrified face, couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong with this arrangement. Saturday, he finally said, his tone flat and final. The cathedral, as planned, but there will be changes to the contract terms. Relief flooded Antonio's features. Of course, whatever you need. I'll have my lawyers draft amendments. You'll sign them. And if there are any more surprises, any more substitutions or irregularities, the deal is off, and you'll find out exactly how vindictive I can be when people waste my time. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Carlo said quickly. Thank you, Mr. Moretti. You won't regret— Get out! The Ferraro men moved toward the door with the urgency of prisoners granted parole. Lucia started to follow, but Sebastian's voice stopped her. Not you. Stay. Her brothers looked back, uncertainty crossing their faces, but one glance from Marco convinced them to keep moving. Antonio was the last to leave, giving his daughter a look that might have been apologetic or might have been warning. Then the door closed, and Sebastian was alone with his terrified bride-to-be. She stood frozen in the center of his office, that death grip on her purse, eyes fixed on the floor. In the silence, he could hear her breathing, rapid, shallow, the rhythm of panic barely contained. Sit down. She moved to the nearest chair like an automaton, perching on the edge, spine rigid. Everything about her body language screamed flight instinct. Sebastian leaned against his desk, arms crossed, studying her with the same intensity he'd used to assess a business competitor. Up close, he could see details his initial assessment had missed. The smudge of exhaustion beneath her eyes, the bitten edge of her lower lip, the way her hands trembled despite her obvious effort to control them. Tell me the truth, he said quietly. Did you volunteer for this? Or did they force you? Her eyes lifted to his, and for a moment he saw something flash there. Resentment, maybe, or anger at the question. Does it matter? Her voice was soft but steadier than before. It might. Why? Good question. Why did it matter? The contract was the contract. Her willingness or lack thereof didn't change the strategic value of the arrangement, but he found himself answering anyway. Because I don't like surprises. And you, Lucia Ferraro, are one hell of a surprise. Something that might have been bitter amusement touched her lips. I'm sorry I'm not Isabella. I'm sure she would have been much more suitable. Where is she? Europe, I think. Maybe Asia. She left 2 weeks ago and didn't tell anyone where she was going. Smart woman. Lucia's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to say that. So when she ran, Sebastian continued, working it out, your father decided to plug you into her place. Did he give you a choice? My family is $3 million in debt to people who make you look merciful, she said, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. My younger brothers, twins, they're 17, would pay the price if the debts aren't settled. My father's heart isn't good. The stress would kill him. So when he asked me to do this, to save them all, what choice did I really have? There it was, the truth beneath the terror. She wasn't a willing participant in some calculated alliance. She was a sacrifice, offered up to save her family from consequences they'd brought on themselves. Sebastian had spent his entire adult life in a world where people traded in human currency, where daughters and sons were bargaining chips, where loyalty and blood came with price tags. He'd made those calculations himself, had arranged marriages and alliances that had nothing to do with anyone's happiness and everything to do with power. But he'd always assumed the people involved understood the game they were playing. Lucia Ferraro didn't understand the game. She was the pawn, not the player. Have you ever had a boyfriend? The question came out before he'd fully formed it. Red flooded her cheeks. That's none of your— Have you? No. The word was sharp, defensive. I've been taking care of my brothers since our mother died 6 years ago. I've been working 2 jobs to help with expenses while my father and my older brothers gambled away everything we had left. I didn't have time for boyfriends or dating or any of the normal things people my age do. Is that what you wanted to hear? There was fire there, beneath the terror. some part of her that hadn't been completely crushed by whatever circumstances had brought her to his office. Sebastian respected fire. "The contract requires consummation," he said bluntly, watching her face. "Your father and brothers made sure to emphasize that point. Do you know what that means?" The color that had flooded her face drained away just as quickly. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair, knuckles white. I'm not stupid. That's not what I asked. I know what it means." Her voice had gone quiet again, defeated. "I know what you'll expect. I know what my obligations are." The word tasted like ash in the air between them. Sebastian pushed off from the desk, moving to the window again, putting distance between them while he processed information that was rearranging his understanding of this entire situation. He'd expected a partner. He was getting a hostage. He'd expected someone who wanted the protection and status his name provided. He was getting someone who was being thrown to him like scraps to a wolf. He'd expected an ally. He was getting a victim. And the worst part, the part that made his jaw tight and his hands curl into fists, was that proceeding with this marriage made perfect strategic sense. Her willingness or happiness or terror didn't change the value of the Ferraro assets. The shipping routes would be just as useful. The connections just as valuable. In the cold calculus of the world he lived in, her feelings were irrelevant. "Saturday," he said without turning around. "The wedding will proceed as planned. You'll move into my home afterward. We'll be seen together at various functions. You'll need appropriate clothing, which my assistant will arrange. In public, you'll act the part of a willing bride. You'll smile, you'll play the role, you'll give no one any reason to question this arrangement. Can you do that?" Silence behind him. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Yes." "And in private," he stopped, the words he'd been about to say, the standard terms of these arrangements, the expectations and obligations, dying on his tongue. In private, what? He'd force her into his bed while she trembled with fear? Demand consummation of a contract she'd been bullied into accepting? Take what was technically his right according to agreements made by men who saw her as property? The Sebastian Moretti who'd walked into this office this morning would have done exactly that without hesitation. But something had shifted in the last 30 minutes. Something about the way she'd looked at him, the way she'd admitted her lack of choice, the way she'd talked about her brothers with protective fierceness, even while accepting her own sacrifice. "In private," he started again, "we'll establish boundaries, rules. You'll have your own room, your own space. I'm not a monster, regardless of what you've been told." He heard her sharp intake of breath, heard the confusion in it. "But the contract? The contract is between me and your father. You and I can make our own arrangements." He turned to face her then and found her staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Hope and disbelief and suspicion all tangled together. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Why would you? Everyone says you always get exactly what you want. Why would you agree to anything less than what the contract specifies?" Why indeed? Sebastian didn't have a good answer for that, didn't understand the instinct that had made him offer her this reprieve. "Maybe I'm tired of getting exactly what I want," he said finally. "Or maybe I just don't like being manipulated by your father's bait and switch. Either way, that's my offer. Take it or leave it." Lucia stood slowly, still watching him like he might transform into something else at any moment. She took a step toward the door, then stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. If you don't want a real wife, if you're willing to have separate rooms and boundaries, why go through with this at all? Why not just walk away?" Smart question, smarter than he'd expected from someone who'd seemed so thoroughly beaten down. "Because I need what your family brings to the table," he answered honestly. "The roots, the connections, the alliance. And because walking away from this deal would make me look weak, and I can't afford to look weak right now. So I'm still just a business transaction." "Yes." The word came out harder than he'd intended. "That's all this is. All it will ever be. Don't mistake my willingness to give you space for anything more than that." Something flickered across her face. Hurt, maybe, or just the final death of some small hope she'd been nursing. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for being honest." She moved toward the door, and this time he didn't stop her. But as her hand touched the handle, she paused again. "For what it's worth," she said without turning around, "I'll be a good wife in public. I'll play the part perfectly. I won't embarrass you or cause problems. That's all I can offer, but I promise you'll get that much." Then she was gone, leaving Sebastian alone in his office, with the setting sun painting the city gold and red beyond his windows. Marco re-entered the room, closing the door behind him. "That was interesting," his consigliere said carefully. "Very unlike you." "Which part?" "The part where you offered her separate rooms. The part where you showed mercy. The part where you let emotion enter into a business negotiation." Sebastian moved to the bar cart, pouring 2 fingers of scotch into a crystal glass. "I didn't show mercy, I showed pragmatism. A terrified wife who hates me is useless. Giving her space to adjust is just good strategy." "Keep telling yourself that, boss." "I didn't ask for commentary, Marco." "No, but you're getting it anyway." The older man moved closer, his expression serious. "I've known you since you were 16 years old. I've watched you make hard decisions, ruthless decisions, decisions that would keep most men up at night. You don't blink. You don't hesitate. But that girl in there, she got to you." "She didn't." "She did." Marco's interruption was firm. "And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe having someone in your life who reminds you you're human isn't the worst outcome. She's a contract obligation, nothing more." "Whatever you say." Marco moved toward the door, then stopped. "But Sebastian, if you're going to play the merciful king, make sure you're ready for what comes next. Because giving her hope and then crushing it later would be crueler than just being the monster she expects." Alone again, Sebastian stood at the window as night fell over Chicago. Marco was wrong. He hadn't shown mercy. He'd made a tactical decision based on new information about the situation. That was all. It was the fact that he couldn't stop thinking about the terror in Lucia's eyes, the defeat in her voice, the fire that had flashed through when she defended herself. None of that mattered. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until he bound himself to a woman who'd been given no choice in the matter, who looked at him like he was death incarnate, who'd accepted her fate with the resignation of someone who'd stopped believing in better options. He drained the scotch, feeling it burn down his throat. The contract demanded a wife. He would get one, on Saturday, in front of 500 witnesses who would never know what fear and desperation had brought Lucia Ferraro to that altar. And if some small part of him whispered that this was wrong, that her terror mattered, that he was becoming exactly the kind of man his father had been, cold, calculating, willing to sacrifice anyone for power, well, that part could shut up and accept reality. This was the world they lived in. This was who he was. And mercy, real mercy, was a luxury neither of them could afford. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations that felt more like planning an execution than a wedding. Lucia sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by dress bags and shoe boxes and the chaos of a wedding that had nothing to do with joy. Through the thin walls, she could hear her father and brothers arguing about seating arrangements, about which families needed to be placated, about how to spin this sudden substitution of brides into something that looked intentional. No one asked her opinion about any of it. Patricia, Sebastian's assistant, had arrived the morning after that terrible meeting with 3 other women and enough designer clothing to outfit a small boutique. They'd measured Lucia, photographed her, asked clipped questions about her preferences that made it clear her answers didn't particularly matter. "Mr. Moretti wants you to look the part," Patricia had said, her tone professional but not unkind. "That means understated elegance. Nothing flashy, nothing that draws the wrong kind of attention. You're becoming a Moretti. That comes with certain expectations." The wedding dress had arrived yesterday, delivered in a climate-controlled vehicle like it was transporting organs for transplant. Lucia hadn't even wanted to look at it, but her father had insisted she try it on, had actually gotten tears in his eyes when she'd emerged from behind the changing screen. "You look just like your mother," he'd whispered. Lucia had wanted to scream at him. Her mother had married for love, had chosen her father despite her own family's objections, had built a life based on partnership and affection. This mockery of a wedding, this transaction dressed up in white silk and lace, would have broken her mother's heart. But she'd said nothing, just stood there while the seamstress pinned and tucked, transforming her into someone she didn't recognize. Now, on Friday evening, less than 18 hours before the ceremony, Lucia stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the Chicago skyline in the distance. Somewhere in that forest of steel and glass, Sebastian Moretti was probably working, making deals, controlling his empire with the same cold efficiency he'd shown in that office. She kept replaying their conversation, trying to understand the contradictions. He'd offered her separate rooms, her own space, boundaries. He'd called it pragmatism, strategy, but there had been something in his eyes when he'd looked at her. Something that wasn't quite indifference, wasn't quite calculation. Or maybe she was just desperate enough to imagine humanity where none existed. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Car will pick you up at 7 a.m. Be ready. Bring overnight bag with essentials. Everything else already at the house. P. Patricia. Efficient to the last, Lucia looked around her cramped bedroom at the life she was leaving behind. The bookshelf crammed with paperbacks she'd read and reread. The desk where she'd helped her brothers with homework for years. The window seat where she used to sit with her mother, talking about dreams and futures that felt impossibly far away now. Tomorrow she would become Lucia Moretti. The thought made her stomach turn. A knock on her door pulled her from the spiral of her thoughts. Carlo entered without waiting for permission, his face drawn with stress. "You okay?" he asked, the question almost laughable in its inadequacy. "Does it matter?" He winced. "Lucy, I know this isn't what you wanted. You don't know anything about what I want." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "You and Dino and Papa, you made your choices. You gambled, you lost, and now I'm the one paying for it. So don't ask me if I'm okay. Don't pretend you care about anything except saving your own skins." Carlo's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. Isn't it? Tell me, if Isabella hadn't run, would any of you have even considered asking me? Or was I always just the backup plan, the daughter you could afford to sacrifice?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I'm doing this," Lucia continued, her voice shaking now. "I'm going through with it because I won't let them hurt the twins. Because I won't watch Papa's heart give out from stress. Because apparently I'm the only one in this family willing to actually sacrifice for the people I love. But don't ask me to smile about it. Don't ask me to pretend this is anything other than what it is." Carlo moved closer, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "He's not a bad man," her brother said quietly. "Moretti, ruthless, yes, dangerous, absolutely. But he has honor in his own way. He'll protect you. Like a possession, like property." Lucia turned back to the window. "Get out, Carlo. I need to pack." She heard him leave, heard the door click shut, and finally allowed herself to cry. Not the loud, cathartic sobs she needed, but quiet tears that wouldn't alert anyone to her breakdown. By the time Patricia's car arrived the next morning, Lucia had cried herself dry. The car was a black Mercedes with windows tinted dark enough to be illegal. The driver was a man roughly the size of a refrigerator who introduced himself as Tony and said nothing else for the entire ride. They didn't go to the cathedral. Instead, they drove to an address in Gold Coast, pulling up to a limestone mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from a European city. The building took up half a block, with wrought iron gates and security that would make the Pentagon jealous. "This is Mr. Moretti's home," Tony said, his first words in 40 minutes. "You're home now. Miss Patricia is waiting inside." Lucia climbed out on shaking legs, clutching her small overnight bag like a shield. The interior of the house was exactly what she'd expected. Expensive, elegant, cold. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than her family's house. Everything perfect and intimidating and utterly without warmth. Patricia appeared from a side hallway, tablet in hand, all business. "Your suite is on the 3rd floor, east wing. I'll show you up. Hair and makeup team arrives in 2 hours. The ceremony starts at 2 o'clock sharp. We need to leave here by 1:15 to account for traffic." "Where is he?" Lucia heard herself ask. "Mr. Moretti is handling business matters. You'll see him at the cathedral." Of course. Why would the groom want to see his bride before their wedding? This wasn't that kind of marriage. Patricia led her through hallways that seemed to go on forever, up a sweeping staircase, down another corridor, finally stopping at a set of double doors. "This is yours," she said, pushing them open. The suite was bigger than Lucia's entire childhood bedroom. King-sized bed, sitting area, walk-in closet, already filled with the clothing from earlier in the week, bathroom done in marble and gold fixtures. French doors led to a private balcony overlooking an interior courtyard. It was beautiful. It was a cage. "Mr. Moretti's suite is in the west wing," Patricia continued, seemingly oblivious to Lucia's spiraling thoughts. "Connected by the main hallway, but completely separate, as he specified. You have full access to the house, of course, though certain areas, his office, the security wing, are restricted. Any questions?" About 1,000, but none Patricia could answer. No, Lucia whispered. Good. I'll send up some breakfast. Try to eat something. It's going to be a long day. Alone, Lucia walked to the French doors, stepping out onto the balcony. The courtyard below was landscaped with mathematical precision, every hedge trimmed, every flower bed symmetrical. Beautiful and controlled and completely artificial. Like this whole arrangement, she should eat, should shower, should start preparing for the performance of a lifetime. Instead, she sat on the balcony floor back against the wall and tried to remember what her life had felt like before it became currency in her family's desperate bargaining. The morning passed in mechanical motions. Shower, breakfast she couldn't taste, hair and makeup artists who transformed her face into something porcelain and perfect. The wedding dress, even more overwhelming than she remembered, layers of silk and lace that weighed her down like chains. Patricia appeared every 30 minutes with updates. Guests are arriving at the cathedral. Everything on schedule. Your father and brothers are in position. They'll meet you in the vestibule. Transportation is ready. Time to go. The drive to the cathedral passed in silence. Lucia sat alone in the back of another Mercedes, watching Chicago slide past the windows, thinking about how easy it would be to just open the door at a stoplight and run. But run where? To what? Her family's debts wouldn't disappear. The dangerous men her father owed money to wouldn't suddenly become forgiving. And Sebastian Moretti, a man who controlled half of Chicago's underworld, would find her within hours. No, there was no escape. There was only endurance. The cathedral was enormous, all Gothic stone and stained glass, the kind of place where powerful families had been celebrating and mourning for generations. Television crews lined the street. Apparently this wedding was newsworthy enough to make the evening broadcast. Smile, Patricia instructed as they pulled up. Cameras are everywhere. Lucia smiled. The expression felt like it belonged to someone else. Her father waited in the vestibule, looking older than she'd ever seen him. Carlo and Dino stood nearby, both in expensive suits, both avoiding her eyes. You look beautiful, Antonio said, his voice thick with emotion. Your mother would be so proud. The lie made Lucia want to scream. Instead, she took his arm when the music started, let him lead her toward the massive wooden doors that would open onto her new life. I'm sorry, he whispered, just before the doors swung wide. I'm so sorry, my girl. Too late for sorry, too late for anything except walking forward. The cathedral stretched before her, an endless aisle lined with hundreds of people. Lucia recognized some faces, family friends, business associates, people from her father's world. Others were strangers, all watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation to something that might have been pity. And at the altar, standing with perfect posture in a black suit that probably cost more than a car, was Sebastian Moretti. He watched her approach with those dark, unreadable eyes. No smile, no warmth, just that same intensity from his office, like he could see through her carefully constructed composure to the terror underneath. Every step felt like walking underwater. The dress was too heavy. Her father's arm was too tight. The music was too loud. Everything was too much and not enough. And wrong. All wrong. But she kept walking, because what else could she do? When they finally reached the altar, Antonio placed her hand in Sebastian's. His palm was warm, his grip firm but not painful. He looked at her for a long moment, something flickering behind his eyes that she couldn't interpret. Then they turned to face the officiant, and the ceremony began. Lucia heard almost none of it. The words washed over her. Love, honor, commitment, partnership. Every one of them a mockery of what this actually was. She responded when prompted, her voice steady through sheer force of will. Sebastian's responses were equally measured, equally emotionless. This could have been a business merger for all the feeling in his tone. The rings, the officiant said. Marco stepped forward with a velvet box. Sebastian took the first ring, a platinum band set with diamonds that caught the light like ice, and reached for Lucia's hand. With this ring, he said, the traditional words, his eyes locked on hers, I thee wed. The metal was cold, sliding onto her finger, a brand, a claim, a chain. Then it was her turn. Her hand shook as she took the simpler platinum band, as she reached for Sebastian's hand. Up close, she could see the calluses on his palm, the faint scar across his knuckles, evidence of a life lived harder than expensive suits suggested. With this ring, I thee wed. Her voice cracked on the last word just slightly, and she saw something flash across Sebastian's face. Concern? Regret? No. Probably just annoyance at her lack of composure. By the power vested in me, the officiant continued, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Lucia's breath caught. They hadn't discussed this. In all the preparations and negotiations and practical arrangements, no one had mentioned this moment. Sebastian stepped closer, one hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and she felt herself flinch despite trying not to. Easy, he murmured, too quiet for anyone else to hear. Just for show, nothing more. Then his lips touched hers, brief and chaste and utterly impersonal. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, just long enough to satisfy tradition, before he pulled back. The cathedral erupted in applause. Lucia felt like she might shatter into pieces. Sebastian offered his arm, the gesture purely formal, and she took it because the alternative was standing frozen at the altar. They walked back down the aisle together, past all those watching faces, cameras flashing, people smiling like this was a happy occasion. The receiving line was torture. Hundreds of people offering congratulations, assessing her, comparing her to Isabella, probably, wondering what Sebastian Moretti saw in this quiet, unremarkable girl. She smiled until her face hurt, shook hands until her fingers went numb, accepted compliments about her dress, her beauty, how lucky she was to have landed such a catch. Lucky. Right. Sebastian stayed beside her through all of it, his hand occasionally touching her lower back or her elbow, small gestures of possession that the crowd ate up. To everyone watching, they looked like a legitimate couple, a powerful alliance, a match made if not in heaven, then at least in the practical world of their shared reality. Only Lucia could feel how careful he was not to actually touch her, how his hand hovered just above her skin, how every contact was calculated for maximum appearance with minimum intimacy. The reception was held at the Four Seasons, an entire ballroom transformed into something out of a fairy tale. White roses everywhere, crystalline candlelight, an orchestra playing classical music that probably cost more per hour than Lucia used to make in a month. Their table was on a raised platform, putting them on display for everyone. Lucia picked at food she couldn't taste, sipped champagne that turned to acid in her stomach, and tried not to think about what came after this reception ended. Sebastian leaned close during the main course, his breath warm against her ear. You're doing well, he said quietly. Keep it up for a few more hours and you can rest. Rest. In his house? As his wife? The thought made panic claw at her throat. The speeches started after dinner. Marco stood first, offering a toast full of carefully coded language about strength and loyalty and the joining of families. Carlo spoke next, his words about Lucia so generic they could have applied to any sister, any bride. Then Sebastian's business partner, a silver-haired man named Vincent, rose with a champagne flute and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. To Sebastian, he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, who always gets what he wants, and to his beautiful bride, who is lucky enough to be wanted by such a man. The crowd laughed, applauded, completely missing the predatory edge in those words. Lucia felt Sebastian's hand tighten on his own glass, saw the muscle jump in his jaw, but he smiled, raised his glass, played the part expected of him. The first dance was announced. Sebastian stood, offered his hand, led her to the center of the ballroom while the orchestra shifted into a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, hers on his shoulder, and they began to move. He was a good dancer, smooth and confident, leading her through the steps with the same controlled precision he probably brought to everything. Breathe, he murmured after a moment. You're shaking. I can't help it. Yes, you can. You've been perfect all day. Don't fall apart now. The words should have been cruel, but his tone was almost gentle. Why are you being kind? She whispered. Earlier, you said this was just business. You said, I know what I said. He spun her, pulled her back. But that doesn't mean I enjoy watching you suffer. Smile, Lucia. Give them the show they came for. So she smiled, even as tears burned behind her eyes. Other couples joined them on the floor. Her father, with some distant aunt. Carlo with a woman Lucia didn't recognize. The dance floor filled with movement and laughter and the illusion of celebration. I spoke to your father this morning, Sebastian said as the music swelled. The debts are settled. The men he owed have been paid in full. Your family is clear. Lucia's step faltered. What? Isn't that why you agreed to this? To protect them? Consider it wedding gift. I don't understand. The contract said a lot of things. I decided to accelerate the timeline. His dark eyes met hers. You held up your end of the bargain. I'm holding up mine. Something broke loose in Lucia's chest. Relief and confusion and an emotion she couldn't quite name. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me. It was always part of the deal. But it wasn't. Not really. The original contract had outlined a payment schedule, protection that would extend over months as the alliance solidified. He could have made her family wait, could have held it over her head as leverage. Instead, he'd freed them immediately. The dance ended. Another began, this time with Lucia passed to Marco while Sebastian danced with someone's grandmother, playing the gracious host. He's not what you expected, is he? Marco said, his tone conversational. Lucia looked across the floor to where Sebastian moved with easy grace, charming an elderly woman who was probably some important family matriarch. I don't know what I expected. Most people see the reputation and think that's all there is. The ruthless Don, the cold strategist, the man who doesn't blink when making hard decisions. Marco spun her gently. They're not wrong. He is all those things, but he's also more complicated than people give him credit for. Why are you telling me this? Because you're terrified of him, and I think that might change if you actually got to know him. This isn't that kind of marriage. Marco's smile was knowing. Give it time, kid. You might surprise yourself. The evening dragged on. More dances, more toasts, more performances of happiness that left Lucia exhausted to her bones. By the time Sebastian finally stood to make their exit, she was running on empty, held together by pure stubborn will. The crowd cheered as they left, throwing rose petals, calling congratulations, completely oblivious to the fact that this bride was leaving on legs that shook with fear rather than anticipation. The car ride back to the house was silent. Sebastian stared out his window, Lucia out hers, the space between them on the leather seat like an ocean. When they pulled through the gates, Tony opened Lucia's door with professional efficiency. Welcome home, Mrs. Moretti. The name hit her like a physical blow. Mrs. Moretti. That's who she was now. Not Lucia Ferraro, the girl who'd worked 2 jobs and raised her brothers and dreamed of a life beyond obligation. Lucia Moretti. A stranger wearing her face. Sebastian's hand touched her elbow, guiding her toward the house. Inside, Patricia waited with that ever-present tablet. Congratulations, she said warmly. Everything went perfectly. I've had your things moved to the master suite as requested, Mr. Moretti. Will you need anything else this evening? Master suite. Not her separate room, not the space he'd promised. Lucia's head whipped toward Sebastian, panic flooding her system. He was already looking at her, his expression unreadable. That will be all, Patricia. Thank you. The assistant disappeared, leaving them alone in the vast entryway. You said, Lucia started, her voice breaking. You promised separate rooms. You said, I know what I said. Sebastian's tone was flat, impossible to read. Come with me. He turned toward the staircase, expecting her to follow. Lucia's feet wouldn't move. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading. All the promises, all the careful boundaries, all of it had been lies designed to get her to the altar without a scene. Now the contract would demand its price. Lucia. Sebastian had stopped halfway up the stairs, looking back at her. I'm not going to ask again. Her legs moved without conscious decision, carrying her up those steps, down the hallway, toward whatever awaited in that master suite. The doors opened onto a room even larger than the one she'd seen this morning, but Sebastian didn't stop there. He kept walking, through the bedroom to another set of doors, pushing them open to reveal a second bedroom, smaller, but still beautifully appointed, clearly designed as a private retreat. This is your room, Tut, he said, gesturing inside. Connected to the master suite through this door, which locks from your side. Patricia misunderstood the arrangement, had your things moved to the wrong space. I'll have them brought here tomorrow. Lucia stared at him, trying to process the whiplash from terror to confusion, to something like relief. I don't understand. What's not to understand? I told you separate rooms. I meant it. He moved to a dresser, pulling out what looked like comfortable clothes. The illusion of sharing the master suite satisfies anyone who might question the arrangement. But in reality, you have your own space, as promised. Why? The question hung between them. Sebastian was silent for a long moment, his back to her, shoulders tense. Because I'm a lot of things, he finally said, but I'm not a rapist. I don't force unwilling women into my bed, contract or no contract. You're safe here, Lucia. Whether you believe that or not is up to you. He turned then, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Weariness. The kind that came from carrying weight no one else could see. Get some rest, he said, his voice gentler than she'd heard it all day. Tomorrow we'll discuss how this is going to work going forward. But tonight, you're safe. You have my word. Then he was gone, the door closing quietly behind him, leaving Lucia alone in her new room, her new life, with more questions than answers, and the strange, unsettling realization that Sebastian Moretti was nothing like the monster she'd expected. Lucia didn't sleep that first night. She sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, still wearing the wedding dress because she couldn't figure out how to get out of it alone, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere beyond the connecting door, Sebastian moved through his own room, footsteps crossing the floor, water running, the quiet click of a door closing. Then silence. She should be relieved. He'd kept his word, given her the space he'd promised, left her untouched and safe. But relief was complicated by confusion, by the cognitive dissonance of everything she'd been told about Sebastian Moretti versus what she'd actually experienced. Everyone said he was ruthless, that he took what he wanted without hesitation, that crossing him meant disappearing into the Chicago River wrapped in chains. Yet he'd walked away from her twice now, once in his office when he could have dismissed her concerns entirely, and again tonight when the contract and tradition and 500 witnesses would have supported his right to consummate this marriage. Why? The question gnawed at her through the dark hours, keeping sleep at bay even as exhaustion pulled at her bones. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through curtains she hadn't thought to close, revealing a room that was beautiful and foreign and utterly without comfort. A soft knock on the connecting door made her jump. Lucia? Sebastian's voice, muffled by the wood between them. Are you awake? She looked down at herself, still in the wedding dress, mascara probably smeared, hair falling from its elaborate styling, the image of a bride who'd spent her wedding night alone and miserable. Yes, she managed. I'm having breakfast brought up. You should eat something. Footsteps retreated before she could respond. 20 minutes later, another knock, this one from the hallway door. A young woman in staff uniform entered with a rolling cart laden with food. Good morning, Mrs. Moretti, she said with a warm smile. I'm Sophia. I'll be helping you with anything you need. Mr. Moretti thought you might like breakfast in your room this morning. The title still jarred. Mrs. Moretti. A name that didn't feel like hers. Thank you, Lucia said quietly. Sophia's eyes landed on the wedding dress, and something sympathetic flickered across her face. Would you like help getting out of that? Those buttons can be tricky. Lucia nodded, grateful beyond words. Sophia's hands were quick and efficient, releasing Lucia from the layers of silk and lace. Underneath, the shapewear and stockings felt like a second cage. The bathroom has everything you might need, Sophia said as she hung the dress carefully in the closet. Mr. Moretti had Patricia stock it yesterday, and your regular clothes will be moved over this afternoon once the staff realizes the room situation. She said it casually, but Lucia caught the knowing tone. The staff understood what the separate rooms meant, even if the outside world wouldn't. After Sophia left, Lucia stood under a shower hot enough to burn, scrubbing away the makeup and hairspray, and the feeling of hundreds of eyes watching her perform happiness. She found a robe hanging on the back of the door, expensive, soft, several sizes too large. Sebastian's, probably. The breakfast cart held enough food for 3 people. Lucia forced herself to eat, knowing she needed the fuel even if everything tasted like cardboard. She was picking at a croissant when the connecting door opened. Sebastian stood in the doorway, dressed casually in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater. Without the formal suits, he looked younger, less intimidating, almost approachable. Almost. We need to talk, he said, not quite a question. Lucia pulled the robe tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she looked. Okay. He moved to the sitting area near the windows, taking one of the chairs and leaving the small couch for her. The distance felt deliberate, careful. How we proceed from here is up to you, he began, his tone measured. In public, we maintain the appearance of a normal marriage. You accompany me to events, we're seen together, we give no one reason to question the legitimacy of this arrangement. That's non-negotiable. Lucia nodded. She'd expected as much. In private, within these walls, things can be different. You have your own space, your own freedom within reason. I won't demand anything from you that you're not willing to give. Within reason, Lucia repeated. What does that mean? It means you're not a prisoner, but you're also not free to leave whenever you want. It means you can't contact anyone without my knowledge. Phone calls, emails, social media, all monitored. It means there are parts of my business you can never know about, questions you can't ask, boundaries you can't cross. Each restriction landed like a small death of hope. So I'm a prisoner with a prettier cell, she said quietly. Sebastian's jaw tightened. You're my wife. That comes with protections as well as limitations. There are people who would love to hurt me through you. Keeping you safe means controlling your exposure. Controlling me, you mean? If that's how you want to see it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, that intense gaze pinning her in place. Lucia, I'm trying to give you what autonomy I can within the reality of this situation, but I need you to understand. This world we live in, it's not safe. It's not kind. And naivete will get you killed faster than anything else. I'm not naive, she shot back, finding some spark of defiance. I know exactly what you are, what this is. You bought me to secure business assets. My father sold me to clear his debts. There's nothing naive about recognizing I'm a transaction. Something flickered in his eyes, anger maybe, or frustration. You're not a transaction. You're a complication I'm trying to manage as fairly as possible. How generous. It is, actually. His voice dropped, taking on an edge that reminded her exactly who she was talking to. You have no idea how much worse this could be. I could demand consummation, keep you locked in this room, treat you like the property your family tried to sell you as. Instead, I'm offering you respect, space, and time to adjust. If you can't appreciate that, appreciate? Lucia stood, the robe falling open slightly before she clutched it closed. You want me to appreciate being trapped in a marriage I didn't choose, with a man I don't know, in a life I never wanted? You want gratitude for not raping me on our wedding night? That's not generosity, Sebastian. That's the bare minimum of human decency. The silence that followed crackled with tension. Sebastian stood slowly, and Lucia's bravado wavered as he crossed the distance between them. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, the precise line of the scar through his left eyebrow. You're right, he said quietly, and the admission shocked her into silence. You're absolutely right. You shouldn't have to be grateful for basic decency. You should have had a choice in all of this. But we are where we are, and the question is whether we make this bearable or unbearable for each other. His hand lifted and Lucia flinched despite herself. He froze, something that might have been hurt crossing his face before his expression smoothed back to neutral. I'm not going to hit you, he said, lowering his hand. I've never hit a woman in my life, and I'm not starting with my wife. I didn't. Yes, you did. Yes. You flinched like you expected violence. He stepped back, putting distance between them again. What did your family tell you about me? What horrors did they paint to make you this terrified? Lucia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm room. They said you were ruthless, that you killed people who crossed you, that you controlled half of Chicago's underworld through fear and violence, that you always got what you wanted, no matter who got hurt in the process. And you believed them. Didn't I have reason to? Sebastian moved back to his chair, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. Everything they told you is true. I am ruthless. I have killed people, not personally, usually, but I've ordered deaths. I do control significant operations through fear when necessary, and I do generally get what I want. The blunt honesty was somehow more frightening than reassuring denials would have been. But, he continued, his eyes meeting hers with unsettling intensity, I'm also capable of discretion, of choosing when to exercise power and when to show restraint. Your family needed you to be terrified enough to go through with this wedding without causing problems, so they told you the worst and left out anything that might have made me seem human. Are you? Human, I mean? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Some days I'm not sure, but I'm trying to be, at least with you. Lucia sank back onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. I don't understand you. One minute you're cold and calculating, talking about me like I'm a business asset. The next you're offering me kindness I don't know how to accept. Which one is real? Both. Sebastian leaned back, studying her with that unnerving focus. I learned a long time ago that you can't survive in this world by being just one thing. Kindness without strength makes you a victim. Strength without kindness makes you a monster. I try to be both, depending on what the situation requires. And what does this situation require? Patience, understanding, time for you to realize I'm not the demon your family made me out to be, and for me to figure out how to have a wife in my life without destroying what little humanity I have left. The vulnerability in that admission made Lucia's throat tight. They sat in silence for a long moment, the morning sun climbing higher beyond the windows, traffic sounds from the street below filtering through the glass. Can I ask you something? Lucia finally ventured. You can ask. I might not answer. Why did you agree to this arrangement in the first place? You're powerful enough to get what you want without marrying some stranger's daughter. Why take on a wife at all? Sebastian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. Because my father built his empire on strategic alliances, and I'm trying to hold that empire together while half the city waits for me to fail. Because the Ferraro assets actually matter, regardless of what you might think. And because... He paused, something complicated crossing his face. Because everyone expected me to marry eventually, and a strategic match seemed preferable to the alternative. What alternative? Caring about someone. Actually loving them. Making them a target. His laugh was bitter. In this world, love is a weakness people exploit. Arranged marriages are safer, cleaner. Lonelier, Lucia added quietly. His eyes found hers, and for a moment she saw past the carefully constructed walls to something raw and isolated beneath. Yes, he admitted, but loneliness doesn't get the people you care about killed. The sadness in those words made Lucia's chest ache. She'd spent the last few days thinking of herself as the only victim in this arrangement, the only one sacrificing. But looking at Sebastian now, seeing the careful distance he maintained from everything and everyone, she wondered if he was just as trapped as she was, only his prison had been built over years instead of days. A phone buzzed. Sebastian pulled it from his pocket, his expression shifting as he read the screen. I have to go, he said, standing. Business that can't wait. Marco will be here within the hour. He'll go over security protocols with you, explain the rules about leaving the house. Listen to what he says, please. The police surprised her. He moved toward the connecting door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Lucia, what you said earlier about not being grateful for basic decency, you're right. You deserve better than this. Better than me. I can't give you the marriage or the life you should have had, but I can promise you this. As long as you're under my protection, no one will hurt you. Not your family's creditors, not my enemies, not anyone. You're safe here, even if you don't feel like it yet. Then he was gone, leaving Lucia alone with her thoughts, and the unsettling realization that Sebastian Moretti was far more complicated than she'd been prepared for. Marco arrived exactly when Sebastian had promised, his large frame filling the doorway, expression somewhere between sympathetic and businesslike. Mrs. Moretti, he greeted, the title still jarring to Lucia's ears. Mind if I come in? She gestured to the sitting area, pulling on sweatpants and a t-shirt Sophia had left for her before Marco entered. At least she could have this conversation without feeling quite so exposed. Sebastian said you'd explain the security rules, she said, settling into the chair Sebastian had occupied earlier. Among other things, Marco took the couch, somehow making the elegant furniture look small. First, the basics. You can move freely through the house. The grounds are monitored 24/7, but you're welcome to use the courtyard, the garden, the pool. The gym is on the second floor if you're interested. And leaving the property? Requires advance notice and security escort. I know that sounds restrictive, but it's necessary. You're a Moretti now. That makes you valuable to people who'd love to hurt Sebastian through you. Lucia nodded, though the confirmation of her earlier fears made her stomach turn. Phone calls, internet access, all monitored, Marco continued. Not to violate your privacy, but to make sure no one's tracking you, no one's using you to get information about Sebastian's operations. If you want to contact your family, that's fine, but it goes through approved channels. So I really am a prisoner. Marco's expression softened. I know it feels like that, but give it time. Once Sebastian's enemies realize you're not a vulnerability they can exploit, some of these restrictions will ease. He's not trying to control you for control's sake. He's trying to keep you alive. Everyone keeps saying that. How dangerous is this world really? What exactly am I being protected from? Marco studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. There are 3 families in Chicago who'd love to see Sebastian dead, he finally said. The Rinaldis, the Castellanos, and the Volkovs. They've been circling since his father died, looking for weakness. A new wife, especially one who doesn't know the rules, doesn't understand the dangers, that's exploitable. They'd use you to get to him without hesitation. Use me how? Kidnapping, torture, sending pieces of you back to Sebastian to make a point. Marco's bluntness was clearly intentional. I'm not trying to scare you, but you need to understand the stakes. This isn't abstract danger. It's real, and it's ugly, and Sebastian's right to be paranoid about your safety. Lucia felt sick. Has someone been hurt that way before? Someone close to him? Marco's jaw tightened. His younger sister, Angela, 8 years ago. The Castellanos took her, thinking they could force Vincenzo to give up territory. By the time Sebastian found her, He stopped, shaking his head. She survived, but she's never been the same. Lives in Italy now, under a different name, with round-the-clock security. She hasn't spoken to Sebastian in 3 years. The pieces clicked together. Sebastian's comments about love being a weakness, about people you care about becoming targets, about loneliness being safer than connection. He blames himself, Lucia said quietly. Of course he does. He was supposed to be watching her that day, but he was handling some business for his father instead. The guilt ate him alive for years. Still does, probably. Marco leaned forward. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand. When Sebastian says he'll protect you, he means it. He won't let what happened to Angela happen to you, even if that means keeping you on a short leash until he's sure you're safe. Lucia processed this, her earlier resentment about the restrictions complicated by new understanding. Does he have any other family? His mother lives in Sicily. They talk once a month, maybe. No other siblings. His father died 6 months ago. Heart attack, natural causes, though there were rumors of poison. Most of his close associates are family in the organizational sense, but not by blood. So he's alone. By choice, mostly. It's safer that way. Marco stood, pulling a phone from his pocket. This is for you. Pre-programmed with numbers you might need. Sebastian, me, Patricia, house staff. It's monitored, but you can use it freely for normal calls. Just remember that anything you say can potentially be intercepted by people who wish us harm. Lucia took the phone, the weight of it in her hand feeling like both connection and constraint. One more thing, Marco added, his tone gentler. I know this is overwhelming. I know you didn't choose any of this, but Sebastian's trying in his own damaged way to make this bearable for you. He doesn't know how to do relationships, doesn't know how to connect with people in normal ways, but he's a good man under all the armor. Give him a chance to prove that. After Marco left, Lucia spent the rest of the day exploring her new prison. The house was enormous. 5 floors, including the basement, rooms she couldn't imagine ever using, artwork worth more than her family's house had been. Everything was beautiful and cold and perfect, designed to impress rather than comfort. She found the library on the 2nd floor and nearly cried with relief. An entire room of books, floor to ceiling, organized by genre and author. At least she'd have this, some escape from the reality of her situation. The gym Marco mentioned was state-of-the-art, all gleaming equipment and floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Lucia changed into workout clothes Sophia had unpacked and spent an hour on the treadmill, running from nothing, going nowhere, burning off the anxiety that had been building since she'd woken up. Dinner appeared in her room, Sophia wheeling in another cart with enough food for multiple people. Will Mr. Moretti be joining me? Lucia asked, not sure if she hoped for yes or no. He's working late, Sophia said apologetically. He said not to wait up. So Lucia ate alone, the silence of the huge house pressing in around her. She tried to read but couldn't focus. Tried to watch television, but everything felt frivolous compared to the upheaval of her life. Finally, she gave up and went to bed. The expensive sheets feeling too smooth, the mattress too soft, everything unfamiliar and wrong. She was drifting into uneasy sleep when she heard the connecting door open quietly. Her eyes flew open in the darkness, heart hammering, every muscle tensing for flight, even though there was nowhere to run. Sebastian's silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the light from his room. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, apparently seeing that she was awake. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I just wanted to make sure you were... I wanted to check on you." Lucia sat up slowly, pulling the covers around herself, even though she was fully dressed in pajamas. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Neither of us is fine. This whole situation is a disaster." The blunt honesty surprised her into silence. Sebastian moved closer, stopping at the foot of her bed, hands in his pockets. In the dim light filtering from his room, he looked exhausted, the careful control he usually maintained frayed at the edges. "I spent the day in meetings," he continued, his voice carrying a weariness that made him sound older, "convincing my associates that this marriage strengthens our position, assuring them that your family's assets are secure, playing the confident leader who has everything under control." He laughed without humor. "Meanwhile, I have a wife who's terrified of me, who flinches when I move too quickly, who thinks I'm some kind of monster who'd force her into my bed." "I don't think you're a monster," Lucia said quietly. "Don't you?" "I don't know what I think anymore. You keep surprising me." Sebastian was quiet for a moment, then moved to the chair near the window, maintaining distance even in this late-night conversation. "Marco told you about Angela," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I'm sorry that happened to her, to both of you. She was 16, bright, funny, full of life. They broke her in 3 days. By the time I found her, she was catatonic. It took months before she'd speak again, years before she could be in a room with men without panicking." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Lucia heard the pain underneath. "I killed every single person involved, personally. The ones who took her, the ones who hurt her, the ones who gave the orders. It didn't help, didn't bring her back, didn't undo what they'd done." "Is that why you stopped? Last night, I mean. Because of what happened to her?" Sebastian's laugh was bitter. "You think I'm capable of that kind of noble motivation? I stopped because I'm selfish, Lucia. Because taking you while you were that terrified would have made me exactly like the men who hurt my sister. And I've done a lot of terrible things in my life, crossed a lot of lines, but I'm not ready to cross that one. Not yet." The "not yet" hung in the air between them. "What happens when you are ready?" Lucia asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. "What happens when patience runs out and you decide the contract's requirements matter more than your scruples?" "I don't know." The admission sounded like it cost him. "I've never had to practice restraint like this before. Everything I've wanted, I've taken. Every obstacle, I've crushed. But you..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You're different. Taking you feels like it would break something in me I might not get back." Lucia's breath caught at the raw honesty. "So we're at an impasse," she said softly. "You can't force me without destroying yourself. I can't leave without endangering everyone I love. Where does that leave us?" Sebastian stood, moving back toward the connecting door. "It leaves us trying to find some middle ground between the disaster this is and the disaster it could become. It leaves us figuring out how to coexist without destroying each other." He paused in the doorway, turning back to look at her. "For what it's worth, I really am sorry. You deserved better than this. Than me." Then he was gone, the door closing softly, leaving Lucia alone in the darkness with her racing thoughts and the disturbing realization that she was starting to see Sebastian Moretti as a person rather than a captor. And that, she suspected, was far more dangerous than her fear had ever been. The days that followed established a strange rhythm, a careful dance of proximity and distance that neither of them seemed to know the steps to. Sebastian left early each morning, usually before Lucia woke, though she'd learned to recognize the sound of his movements through the connecting door, the shower running at 6, footsteps crossing the floor, the quiet click of his departure. He returned late, often after she'd retreated to her room, though sometimes she'd hear him pause outside her door as if debating whether to knock. He never did. Their actual interactions were limited to brief exchanges in passing, carefully choreographed moments that felt more like diplomacy than marriage. "Good morning. Did you sleep well? I'll be home late tonight." All surface pleasantries that kept them safely distant from anything real. But on the 4th day, Sebastian knocked on her door at 7 in the evening, earlier than he'd been home all week. We have an event tomorrow night, he said when she opened the door. Charity gala, a lot of important people. You'll need to be ready by 6. Lucia nodded, already dreading it. What should I wear? Patricia's sending options tomorrow. Pick whichever one you're most comfortable in. He started to turn away, then stopped. Have you eaten dinner? The question surprised her. Not yet. Sophia was going to bring something up. Eat with me instead. Downstairs. Unless you'd prefer to be alone. The invitation hung between them, tentative in a way that didn't match his usual commanding presence. Okay, Lucia heard herself say. Give me 10 minutes to change. She found him in the formal dining room, a space they hadn't used before. The table could easily seat 20, but place settings had been arranged at one end, across from each other rather than at opposite ends. Close enough for conversation, but not uncomfortably intimate. Sebastian had changed too, trading his work suit for dark slacks and a simple button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the most casual she'd seen him, and somehow that made him seem more human, less like the untouchable Don and more like just a man having dinner. Thank you for joining me, he said as she sat down. I've been eating alone all week and realized that's probably ridiculous given that I have a wife living in the same house. A wife you're contractually obligated to have, Lucia couldn't help pointing out. True. But we're both here. We both have to eat, and I thought... He trailed off, looking almost uncertain. I thought maybe we could try to be less miserable about the whole situation. Staff appeared with wine in the first course, moving with practiced efficiency before disappearing again. The food was exquisite, some kind of seafood appetizer that probably had a French name Lucia didn't know. Marco said you've been exploring the house, Sebastian ventured after a moment of silence. Found anything interesting? The library, Lucia said, relaxing slightly. Books were safe territory. It's incredible. I've never seen a private collection like that. My mother's doing. She's a literature professor in Sicily. Made sure I grew up surrounded by books. Most of them I've never read, but she insists I keep adding to it. You talked to her about your library, but not about your life? The words came out sharper than Lucia intended, but Sebastian didn't seem offended. My mother knows what I am, what I do. She chose to remove herself from it years ago. We maintain contact, but we both understand the boundaries. He took a sip of wine. She was furious when she found out about the marriage. Said I was becoming just like my father, treating people like chess pieces. What did you say? That she was right, and I was sorry, and I'd try to do better. His eyes met hers. I'm not sure I'm succeeding at that last part. Lucia considered him across the table. This complicated man who could order deaths without blinking but felt guilty about disappointing his mother, who'd built walls around himself so thick she wasn't sure anyone could breach them. You gave me separate rooms when you didn't have to, she said quietly. You paid my family's debts immediately instead of holding them over me. You're trying to make this bearable, even though the contract doesn't require that. Those things count for something. Do they? Or are they just the bare minimum of decency dressed up to look like virtue? The question echoed what Lucia herself had said days ago, thrown back at her now with self-awareness that caught her off guard. Maybe both, she admitted. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Try to be decent in indecent situations and hope it's enough. Something shifted in Sebastian's expression, a crack in the armor she'd only glimpsed in those late-night conversations. The main course arrived, perfectly cooked steak with vegetables arranged like art. They ate in silence for a while, but it felt different than the awkward quiet of before. Less hostile, more contemplative. Can I ask you something? Lucia ventured. And will you actually answer honestly? Depends on the question. Do you regret it? The marriage, I mean. If you could go back, knowing what you know now about how wrong this all went, would you still go through with it? Sebastian set down his fork, giving the question the consideration it deserved. Yes and no. I regret that you got caught in the middle of your family's desperation and my strategic planning. I regret that you're trapped in a situation you never wanted. But do I regret having you here instead of Isabella, who would have been calculating and cold and probably trying to poison me by now? No, I don't regret that part. You would have preferred a wife trying to poison you? I would have understood it better. Known how to respond. He struggled for words. You're genuine in a way I'm not equipped to handle. When you're angry, you're actually angry. When you're scared, you're actually scared. There's no manipulation, no hidden agenda. It's disconcerting. Most people would consider that a good thing. Most people don't live in my world. Sebastian's smile was rueful. In my world, everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. But you just want to not be here, which is possibly the most honest motivation I've encountered in years. Lucia laughed despite herself, surprised by the sound. So my complete unwillingness to participate in this arrangement is somehow refreshing to you? Perversely, yes. They finished dinner with easier conversation. Sebastian asking about her life before, Lucia carefully sharing stories about her brothers, her mother, the normalcy that felt like a lifetime ago. He told her about growing up in this house, about his father's expectations, about learning the family business alongside learning algebra and literature. I was 16 when I made my first collection run, he said over coffee. Dad thought I needed to understand the reality of what we did, not just the theory. Took me to some guy's apartment, made me watch while he explained what happened to people who didn't pay their debts on time. That's horrible. That was my childhood. Sebastian's tone was matter of fact. By the time I was 20, I could negotiate territorial agreements, manage protection rackets, and identify police informants. Normal kids were graduating college. I was running enforcement operations. Did you ever want something different? The question seemed to surprise him. When I was younger, maybe. I thought about law school once. Figured I could use what I knew about criminal operations to prosecute people like my father. He laughed bitterly. That lasted until I realized I was already in too deep. You don't just walk away from this life. Angela did. Angela barely survived, and she lost everything in the process, her family, her home, her ability to trust anyone. That's not walking away. That's running wounded. His hands tightened around his coffee cup. I won't let that happen to you. Whatever else this marriage is or isn't, you're under my protection. No one touches you. No one hurts you. The intensity in his voice made Lucia's breath catch. Why does that matter so much to you? I mean, beyond the guilt about your sister. Why do you care if I get hurt? Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his expression troubled. I don't know, he finally admitted. I shouldn't care. You're right that this was a transaction, that I acquired you like any other asset. But somewhere between your terror in my office and your defiance in these last few days, you stopped being an asset and started being a person I feel responsible for. And I hate that feeling because caring about people is dangerous in my world. But I can't seem to stop myself where you're concerned. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Lucia's phone buzzed before she could respond. The one Marco had given her. She glanced at the screen and felt her chest tighten. It's my brother, she said quietly. Carlo, can I? Of course, I'll give you privacy. Sebastian started to stand, but Lucia shook her head. You'll just monitor the call anyway, right? Might as well stay. Something that looked like hurt flashed across his face, but he settled back into his chair without comment. Lucia answered, putting it on speaker. Carlo? Lucy, finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. I've been adjusting. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. That's why I'm calling. Dad's creditors. They're all paid off. Every single one. The twins are safe, Dad's not looking over his shoulder every 5 minutes, and we can actually breathe again. Carlo's voice cracked with emotion. I know you paid a terrible price for that. I know what you sacrificed. But I need you to know it wasn't for nothing. You saved us, Lucy. You really did. Lucia felt tears burn her eyes. Across the table, Sebastian was studying his coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. I'm glad you're safe, she managed. That's all I wanted. How are you? Is Moretti treating you okay? Lucia looked at Sebastian, at the careful distance he maintained even now, at the walls he'd built so high she wasn't sure anyone could scale them. He's not what I expected, she said slowly. It's complicated. If he hurts you, he won't. The certainty in her voice surprised her. He's a lot of things, Carlo, but he's not cruel. Not to me, anyway. She saw Sebastian's head lift slightly, though he still didn't look at her. They talked for a few more minutes, Carlo updating her on the twins, on their father's improving health, on the normalcy returning to their lives. Normal. What a concept. When she hung up, the silence felt heavier than before. Thank you, Lucia said quietly, for paying the debt so quickly, for giving them their lives back. It was part of the agreement. It was more than that, and we both know it. You could have dragged it out, used it as leverage, but you didn't. Sebastian finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Your family's suffering doesn't serve my purposes. Their gratitude might. Besides, you're miserable enough without worrying about whether your brothers are safe. Ever the pragmatist. It's kept me alive this long. But Lucia stood, suddenly exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the evening. Thank you for dinner. It was nice. Better than eating alone. We could make it a regular thing, Sebastian offered, the suggestion almost tentative. Dinner together a few nights a week, give us a chance to be less like strangers sharing a house. I'd like that. The small smile that touched his lips transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. Good night, Lucia. Good night, Sebastian. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. That thing you said earlier about all we can do is try to be decent in indecent situations? You're better at that than you think. Better than most people I know. Lucia looked back at him, this complicated man who kept surprising her with flashes of unexpected humanity. So are you, she said softly. You just don't let yourself believe it. The gala the next night was every bit as overwhelming as Lucia had feared. Patricia had sent up 3 dress options, all elegant and expensive and completely unlike anything Lucia had ever worn. She chose a midnight blue gown with a modest neckline and an open back, a compromise between the conservative style she preferred and the statement piece a Moretti wife was apparently expected to make. Sophia helped with hair and makeup, transforming Lucia into someone who looked like she belonged in Sebastian's world. When she finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the sophisticated woman staring back. Sebastian knocked at 7 precisely, and when she opened the door, his expression froze for just a moment. Surprise, maybe. Or appreciation. Something that made warmth spread through her chest despite her best efforts to remain detached. You look beautiful, he said simply. You clean up pretty well yourself. He did. The tuxedo fit him perfectly, emphasizing his athletic build, the dark fabric making his eyes look even more intense than usual. He offered his arm, the gesture formal, but not cold. Ready to play the happy couple for a few hours? As ready as I'll ever be. The venue was the Art Institute, the grand entrance lit up like a movie premiere. Photographers lined the steps. Apparently the city's elite being charitable was newsworthy, and Lucia felt her anxiety spike as cameras started flashing the moment their car pulled up. Sebastian's hand found the small of her back, warm through the open back of her dress. Smile, he murmured near her ear. Let them see how perfect we are together. So Lucia smiled, leaning into him slightly, playing the role of the devoted wife while flashbulbs exploded around them. Sebastian guided her up the steps with practiced ease, stopping to acknowledge people whose names Lucia didn't catch, introducing her as my wife with something that almost sounded like pride in his voice. Inside, the museum had been transformed into a glittering wonderland, ice sculptures, champagne fountains, an orchestra playing classical music that echoed off the marble floors. The crowd was exactly what she'd expected, wealthy, powerful people in expensive clothes, all carefully assessing each other for weakness or opportunity. Stay close to me, Sebastian said quietly as they entered the main gallery. Don't accept drinks from anyone. Don't wander off alone. And if someone makes you uncomfortable, you come find me immediately. Understood? The instructions reminded Lucia that this wasn't just a party. It was enemy territory where she was a visible target. The next hour was a blur of introductions. Business associates who looked at Lucia like she was a curiosity. Society wives who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. Older men who held her hand too long and made comments about Sebastian's good fortune that made her skin crawl. Through it all, Sebastian stayed close, his hand always somewhere on her back, her elbow, her waist, claiming her, yes, but also protecting her, steering her away from people whose eyes lingered too long or whose smiles held malice. You're doing great, he murmured during a brief moment alone. I know this is exhausting, but you're handling it perfectly. I feel like a show pony, Lucia admitted. Everyone's staring. They're staring because you're the most beautiful woman in the room, and I'm the luckiest bastard here. The compliment seemed genuine rather than performative. Also because they're trying to figure out why I married a Ferraro daughter, instead of forming an alliance with someone more strategically valuable. What do you tell them? That I'm an impulsive romantic who was swept off his feet by your charms. His smile was sardonic. They don't believe it, of course, but it's entertaining to watch them try to figure out my real angle. A waiter appeared with champagne. Sebastian took 2 glasses, handing one to Lucia after a subtle inspection of the server's face. Checking for threats, she realized. Even here, surrounded by Chicago's elite, he was constantly vigilant. Sebastian Moretti, as I live and breathe. The voice came from behind them, smooth and cultured with an undertone of mockery. Lucia felt Sebastian's entire body tense, his hand on her waist tightening almost imperceptibly. They turned to find a man in his 50s, silver-haired and distinguished, with cold blue eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. 2 younger men flanked him, bodyguards pretending to be associates. Vincent Rinaldi, Sebastian said, his tone carefully neutral. Didn't expect to see you here. It's for charity, Sebastian. Even old rivals can set aside business for a good cause. Rinaldi's gaze shifted to Lucia, assessing her with uncomfortable thoroughness. And this must be the mysterious bride, the Ferraro girl who replaced her sister at the altar. My wife, Lucia, Sebastian said, the edge in his voice unmistakable. Lucia, Vincent Rinaldi, an old family friend. The irony in family friend was heavy enough to cut. Charming, Rinaldi said, though nothing about his tone suggested he found her charming at all. Tell me, my dear, how are you finding married life? Is Sebastian treating you well? The question was loaded with implications Lucia didn't fully understand, but she felt Sebastian's warning tension. Very well, she said, keeping her voice steady. I'm lucky to have him. Lucky. Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. Rinaldi's smile sharpened. Though I wonder if your sister would agree, given her sudden decision to flee the country rather than honor the original arrangement. My sister made her choice. I made mine. Lucia lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of courage she could find. And I'm happy with it. Something flickered in Rinaldi's eyes, surprise maybe at her defiance. How refreshing, a Ferraro with spine. He turned back to Sebastian. You chose well, it seems, though I do hope you're taking proper precautions. These are dangerous times, and beautiful wives make such tempting targets. The threat was barely veiled. Sebastian's arm slid fully around Lucia's waist, pulling her against his side. Anyone who touches what's mine answers to me personally, he said, his voice dropping to a register that made the air feel colder. I thought I'd made that clear after the Castellano situation. Oh, perfectly clear. Just a friendly reminder that accidents happen. Tragic, unavoidable accidents. Rinaldi's smile never wavered. Enjoy the evening, you two. Marriage is such a precious thing. One should treasure every moment. He drifted away, his bodyguards following, leaving a wake of tension behind him. What was that about? Lucia asked quietly. What Castellano situation? Sebastian's jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. 3 months ago, someone associated with the Castellano family made a move on one of my operations. I responded by dismantling their entire drug distribution network and putting their second-in-command in the hospital for 6 weeks. It was a message. And he just threatened me. Us. Yes. Sebastian's hand moved to her back, guiding her toward a quieter corner. This is what I meant about you being a target. Rinaldi sees you as my weakness. He'll probe, looking for opportunities to exploit. Fear spiked through Lucia, cold and sharp. Maybe I shouldn't have come. Maybe being seen in public with you is, hey. Sebastian turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Look at me. You're safe. I won't let anything happen to you. But I need you to be smart, to follow the security protocols, to trust me when I say you're in danger. Lucia nodded, though her hands were shaking. Sebastian noticed, his expression softening. Come on, he said, taking her hand. Let's get some air. He led her through the crowd to a balcony overlooking the city, the night air cool against her overheated skin. Lucia gripped the railing, trying to calm her racing heart. I knew this world was dangerous, she said shakily, but knowing it abstractly and having someone threaten me to my face are very different things. Welcome to my reality. Sebastian stood beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. This is why I'm paranoid about security, why I monitor your communications, why I can't just let you wander around the city freely. Every person you meet could be looking for a way to hurt me through you. How do you live like this, constantly watching for threats, never trusting anyone? Practice. And by accepting that isolation is the price of survival. He turned to look at her, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. But you shouldn't have to live like this. You deserve normal, safe, boring. Instead, you got me and my nightmare of a world. Lucia studied his profile, this man who'd become infinitely more complicated than the monster her family had described. You keep apologizing for what this is, but you're also the only reason I'm safe from it. That's a strange contradiction. My entire existence is a contradiction. Trying to be honorable in a dishonorable profession, protecting people while running operations that hurt others, wanting something real with you while knowing I'm incapable of giving it. The last part made Lucia's breath catch. What do you mean, wanting something real? Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the railing. I mean that somewhere in the last week, you stopped being my contractual obligation and started being someone I actually want to know, someone whose smile makes my chest feel strange, someone whose fear hurts more than it should. He laughed bitterly. I'm not supposed to feel this way. It's not strategic. It's not smart. It makes you even more of a target, but I can't seem to stop myself. Lucia's heart hammered against her ribs. Sebastian, don't. He pushed off the railing, putting distance between them. Don't say anything. I shouldn't have told you that. Forget I said it. I can't just forget it. Then ignore it. File it away under more evidence that I'm a selfish bastard who wants what he can't have. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the perfect styling. We should go back inside. People will talk if we're gone too long. But Lucia caught his arm before he could leave, surprised by her own boldness. What if I don't want to ignore it? The words came out before she could stop them. What if I'm feeling the same contradictions, the same confusion about what this is becoming? Sebastian stared at her, something raw and vulnerable crossing his face before his walls slammed back into place. Then we're both in trouble, he said quietly. Because feelings complicate everything. They make you weak. They give enemies leverage. In my world, caring about someone is signing their death warrant. Maybe your world doesn't have to be that way. Maybe it does. His voice was firm. This isn't a fairy tale, Lucia. I can't be redeemed by love. I can't walk away from this life. All I can do is try to keep you safe while fighting the instinct to pull you closer, knowing that closer means more danger for you. The pain in his voice made Lucia's chest ache. They stood there on the balcony, Chicago glittering below them, the sounds of the gala filtering through the glass doors. Two people trapped in an impossible situation, fighting an attraction that could destroy them both. We should go back, Lucia finally said, her voice thick with emotions she didn't fully understand. Sebastian nodded, offering his arm again. Together? Together. They returned to the gala, slipping back into their roles as the perfect couple. But something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither of them knew how to handle. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. More conversations, more careful smiles, more playing pretend while the truth simmered beneath the surface. It wasn't until they were in the car heading home, the city sliding past the dark windows, that Lucia finally spoke. Thank you for protecting me tonight. From Rinaldi, I mean. Always. Sebastian's response was immediate. That's not negotiable. Well, even though protecting me means caring about me, which you just said makes me a target? He turned to look at her, his expression somewhere between frustrated and fond. You're already a target by virtue of being my wife. Might as well actually care about you while I'm at it. Despite everything, Lucia smiled. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. That's depressing. Welcome to my life. They both laughed, the sound unexpected and genuine, tension breaking like ice in spring. Back at the house, they walked upstairs together, footsteps echoing in the quiet halls. At Lucia's door, Sebastian paused. Thank you for tonight, he said. For handling Rinaldi with grace, for not falling apart when he threatened you, for being exactly what I needed you to be. I'm getting good at being someone I'm not. No. His hand came up, fingertips brushing her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. You're being exactly who you are. Strong, brave, real. That's what scares me most. That you're making me want things I can't have. Before Lucia could respond, he stepped back, breaking the contact. Good night, Lucia. Good night, Sebastian. She watched him walk away toward his own room, putting physical distance between them even as the emotional distance shrank with every passing day. Inside her room, Lucia leaned against the door, her heart racing, her mind spinning with everything that had happened, everything that had been said. She was falling for him. For Sebastian Moretti, the man who'd bought her like an asset, who lived in a world of violence and danger, who'd just confessed to feeling the same impossible pull toward her. It was the worst possible development in an already complicated situation. But as Lucia changed out of her gown and climbed into bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the vulnerability in his eyes, the pain in his voice when he talked about wanting what he couldn't have. Maybe they were both in trouble. But maybe, just maybe, they could figure out how to navigate this disaster together. The shift happened gradually over the next few weeks, small changes that accumulated into something neither of them could deny. Sebastian started coming home earlier, seeking her out for those dinners that had become routine. They'd talk for hours, conversations ranging from books to childhood memories to the careful philosophizing about morality in impossible situations. He told her about the business in vague terms, never enough to implicate her, but enough that she understood the weight he carried. She told him about her dreams before all this, about wanting to teach literature, about the life she'd imagined that looked nothing like the one she was living. And somewhere in those conversations, the fear that had defined their early days began to transform into something else entirely. Lucia found herself listening for his footsteps, feeling disappointment when he had to work late, anticipating their evenings together with something that felt dangerously close to eagerness. She caught herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way his brow furrowed when he was thinking, the rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, the careful way he moved around her like she was something precious that might break. Sebastian's walls were crumbling too, though he fought it every step of the way. She'd catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. His casual touches lingered longer, a hand on her back, fingers brushing hers when passing something at dinner. Once, she'd fallen asleep reading in the library and woken to find him covering her with a blanket, his expression so tender it made her chest ache. They were falling for each other, and both of them knew it was dangerous. 3 weeks after the gala, Lucia woke to find a note slipped under her door. Garden, 7 a.m., please. S. She found him in the courtyard, surrounded by morning mist, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. He'd set up a small table with coffee and pastries, an attempt at romance that was so at odds with his usual controlled demeanor that Lucia felt her throat tighten with emotion. What's this? She asked softly. I wanted to do something normal. Something that people who are dating might do, not people trapped in a contract. He pulled out a chair for her. I know it's stupid, that we're past the point of courtship, but I thought, it's perfect. Lucia sat down, accepting the coffee he poured with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher, burning off the mist. Finally, Sebastian spoke. I need to tell you something. About the contract. Lucia's stomach dropped. Okay. I had my lawyers review it last week. There's a clause I'd forgotten about. After 6 months, if both parties agree, the marriage can be annulled with no financial penalty. Your family keeps the debt settlement, the alliance stands, but you'd be free. The words hit Lucia like a physical blow. You want to end this? No. Sebastian's response was immediate, almost desperate. That's the problem. I don't want to end this, but I wanted you to know the option exists, that you're not permanently trapped, that if you want out, there's a way. Why are you telling me this now? He met her eyes, his expression raw with vulnerability. Because I'm falling in love with you, and I need to know if you're staying because you want to or because you think you don't have a choice. The confession hung in the morning air, fragile and terrifying. Lucia's hand shook as she set down her coffee cup. You can't just say something like that and expect me to... I know it's unfair. I know I have no right to these feelings, that I bought you like property, that this whole situation is built on coercion and desperation. But I can't keep pretending I see you as just an obligation when you're the first thing I think about every morning and the last thing before I sleep. When making you smile feels more important than any business deal. When the thought of you walking away makes it hard to breathe. Tears burned in Lucia's eyes. Sebastian, you don't have to say anything now. I just needed you to know, to have the choice that was taken from you before. He stood, clearly preparing to leave, to give her space to process. I'm falling in love with you too, Lucia said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. And I hate it because I don't know if these feelings are real or just some twisted version of Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know if I'm choosing you or just choosing the least terrible option in a terrible situation. Sebastian's expression crumpled with something between hope and pain. So what do we do? I don't know. Lucia stood, moving closer to him. But I know I don't want the annulment. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I know that this, whatever this is between us, feels more real than anything else in my life right now. And I know that I'm terrified of what that means. Me too. His hand lifted, cupping her face with devastating gentleness. I've never been this scared of anything. Not rival families, not federal investigations, not anything. But losing you? That terrifies me. They stood there in the morning light, inches apart, everything unspoken crackling between them. Can I kiss you? Sebastian asked, his voice rough. Not for show, not for the contract, just because I want to. Lucia's answer was to close the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was nothing like the brief, impersonal touch at their wedding. This was real, desperate, full of weeks of tension and confusion, and the terrifying realization that they'd both fallen too far to climb back out. Sebastian's arms came around her, pulling her against him like he was afraid she might disappear. Lucia's hands fisted in his shirt, holding on just as tightly, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, she felt safe. Not protected the way Sebastian's security made her safe, but truly safe in the way that came from being with someone who would never deliberately hurt you. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. This is still a disaster, he murmured. The worst, Lucia agreed. You're still in danger just by being with me. I know. I'm still a criminal who's done terrible things. I know that too. And you're still staying? Lucia pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I'm still staying. Not because I have to. Because I want to. Because somehow, impossibly, you became someone I can't imagine my life without. The smile that broke across Sebastian's face was like sunrise, transforming him into someone years younger, someone who hadn't learned to bury every soft emotion under layers of armor. I don't deserve you, he said softly. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. He kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise rather than desperation. And Lucia felt something unlock in her chest, some final resistance giving way to the truth she'd been fighting. She loved him. This complicated, dangerous, surprisingly tender man. And maybe that made her foolish. Maybe it meant she'd lost herself somewhere in the translation from captive to willing participant. But it felt right in a way nothing else had since this whole situation began. The next few weeks were a revelation. With the pretense dropped, with both of them acknowledging what they felt, everything changed. Sebastian brought her coffee every morning, learning exactly how she liked it. They cooked dinner together sometimes, his minimal skills making her laugh as he struggled with anything more complicated than pasta. He showed her parts of his life he'd kept hidden, the workshop in the basement where he restored vintage motorcycles, the sketchbooks full of architectural drawings from a teenage dream of becoming a designer. Lucia introduced him to her favorite books, curling up beside him in the library while he read passages aloud with surprising skill. She taught him to play chess, delighted to discover he was a terrible loser. They talked about everything and nothing, building the foundation of understanding that should have come before marriage, but was coming now, better late than never. But they still hadn't slept together. Sebastian maintained the separate rooms, never pushing, letting Lucia control the pace of their physical relationship. They kissed, touched, fell asleep tangled together on the couch more than once. But he never asked for more, never assumed the feelings gave him rights to her body. Why? Lucia asked one night, lying beside him on his bed where they'd been watching a movie. Why haven't you... we're married. We clearly want each other. What are you waiting for? Sebastian's hand traced idle patterns on her arm. Because the first time I make love to you, I want it to be perfect. I want you to have no doubts, no fear, no question that you're choosing this, that you're choosing me. His eyes met hers in the dim light. We started this all wrong, with force and fear and obligation. I want to do this right. What if I'm ready now? What if I'm choosing this, choosing you, right now? His breath caught. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, I don't know if I can go back to just stolen kisses and careful distance. If I have you completely, I'll want to keep you that way. Then keep me. Lucia shifted, straddling his lap, her hands framing his face. I'm sure, Sebastian, I'm scared and I'm probably crazy, and I have no idea if we can make this work long term. But I'm sure about this, about wanting you. So stop being noble and just be with me." The control Sebastian had maintained for weeks shattered. His hands came up to tangle in her hair, pulling her down into a kiss that was pure fire, all the restraint and careful distance burning away in an instant. Lucia gasped against his mouth, grinding down against him, feeling his response and glorying in it. "Last chance," he murmured against her lips. "Last chance to change your mind." "Stop talking," she breathed, and then there were no more words, just sensation and feeling, and the slow, careful way he undressed her like she was art, like he was memorizing every inch of skin revealed. He was gentle in a way that made tears prick her eyes, constantly checking that she was okay, that nothing hurt, that she wanted everything he was doing. And when they finally came together, when he filled her with a care that spoke of devotion rather than possession, Lucia understood what he'd meant about doing this right. This wasn't the contract being consummated. This wasn't an obligation being fulfilled. This was two broken people finding wholeness in each other, two lost souls choosing connection over isolation, two hearts taking a terrifying leap of faith that love might be worth the risk. After they lay tangled together, Sebastian's hand stroking her hair, Lucia's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I know I said it before, but I need you to hear it again. I love you, Lucia. Not because I'm supposed to, not because of any contract. I love you because you're brave and kind, and you saw past the monster everyone else sees, because you challenged me to be better, because you make me want to be worthy of you." Lucia lifted her head, finding his eyes in the dim light. "I love you too. I fought it for so long, told myself it was impossible, that I was confusing safety with affection. But it's not that. You're not just my protector. You're my partner. The person I want to talk to about everything. The one who makes me feel like myself even in this strange new life." He pulled her up for a kiss, slow and sweet and full of promise. "Stay with me. Not in your room, not in separate spaces. Stay here, in my bed, in my life. Choose me every day, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." "I'll stay," Lucia promised, "but on one condition. Anything. We burn the contract, not legally. I know the alliance still matters for business, but symbolically. I want to know we're together because we're choosing this, not because some piece of paper says we have to be." Sebastian's smile was brilliant. "Done. Tomorrow, we burn it together. Start fresh, as partners instead of contractual obligations." They made love again, slower this time, savoring each touch, each sensation. And when Lucia finally fell asleep in Sebastian's arms, in his bed, in a life that had started as a nightmare and transformed into something precious, she felt at peace for the first time in months. The burning of the contract became a small ceremony, just the two of them in the courtyard where Sebastian had first confessed his feelings. Marco had delivered the original document with a knowing smile and no questions asked. They stood together, watching the paper catch flame, watching the words that had bound them in obligation curl into ash. "To new beginnings," Sebastian said, his arm around Lucia's waist. "To choosing each other," Lucia added. The ashes scattered in the wind, carrying away the last remnants of coercion, leaving only choice and love and the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of building something real from the ruins of what they'd been forced into. 3 years later, Lucia stood in that same courtyard watching Sebastian play with their daughter in the autumn leaves. Elena, 18 months old, had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. She shrieked with laughter as Sebastian chased her in slow motion, letting her think she was faster than him. The business had evolved. Sebastian had slowly transitioned from the violent operations his father had run to more legitimate enterprises, still morally gray, still towing legal lines, but without the body count. The Rinaldis had tested them twice in the first year. Both times, Sebastian had responded with strategic precision rather than bloodshed, earning grudging respect even from his enemies. Lucia had started teaching at a small private school, using a carefully constructed background that bore her married name but nothing of her past. Her students knew her as Mrs. Moretti, the literature teacher who brought passion to poetry and made them love books. They didn't know she'd been sold into marriage to save her family, that she'd fallen in love with a man the world called a monster, that her daughter slept under the protection of security that rivaled heads of state. Her family visited sometimes. The twins were in college now, her father's health much improved. The relationship was complicated, scarred by what they'd put her through, but healing slowly. Carlo had apologized 100 times. Lucia had forgiven him, though trust was slower to rebuild. Sebastian emerged from his work just as often now, choosing family dinners over late-night meetings, choosing Elena's bedtime stories over business calls. He'd softened in ways Lucia had never imagined possible. The hard edges worn smooth by love and fatherhood, and the daily choice to be better than the man he'd been raised to be. "Mama," Elena called, toddling toward Lucia with leaves in her curly hair. "Dada fast." "Very fast," Lucia agreed, scooping up her daughter and spinning her around. "But Mama's faster." Sebastian caught up to them, wrapping his arms around both of them, and Lucia felt the same surge of impossible gratitude she felt every day. This life shouldn't have been possible. The statistics were against them. Marriages that started in trauma rarely survived, let alone thrived. The danger was real. They'd had scares, close calls, moments when Sebastian's world had threatened to swallow them whole. But they'd fought for this. For each other, for Elena, for the right to choose love over convenience, connection over isolation. "What are you thinking about?" Sebastian asked, his lips brushing her temple. "How far we've come. How impossible this seemed that first day in your office when I was terrified and you were so cold." "I was never cold with you." "Careful, maybe. Trying not to show how much you affected me from that first moment." He shifted Elena to his other arm. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life instead of taking the annulment?" Lucia turned in his arms, meeting his eyes, those dark eyes that had seemed so frightening once and now felt like home. "Never. Not once. This isn't the life I imagined, and I won't pretend the beginning wasn't traumatic. But you, us, Elena, this is exactly what I want. You're exactly who I want." He kissed her, slow and sweet, while Elena squirmed between them, making disgusted toddler noises that made them both laugh. Later that night, after Elena was asleep, they stood together in Sebastian's office while he finalized the last legitimate business acquisition. A shipping company that would employ the routes Lucia's family had once controlled, now fully legal and above board. "This is it," he said, signing the final document. "The last piece. As of tomorrow, Moretti Enterprises is completely legitimate. No more gray areas, no more dancing with the law." "Your father would hate it," Lucia observed. "My father would hate a lot of things about my life now. But he's gone. And I'm building something different. Something Elena can be proud of one day." He pulled Lucia into his lap, and she curled against him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling his heartbeat steady under her palm. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The danger, the power, the respect that came from fear?" Sebastian was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. It was simpler in some ways, but then I remember what that life cost. My sister's sanity, my father's soul, my own humanity almost. And I look at what I have now, at you and Elena, at this legitimate empire we're building together. There's no comparison. I'd choose this every single time. Even knowing how it started, even knowing I was forced into this, even knowing that," he tipped her face up to meet his eyes. "Because yes, the beginning was forced, but everything after was a choice. Every day we chose each other. Every moment we decided love was worth the risk. That's what matters. Not how we started, but how we continued. How we built something real from something broken." Lucia kissed him, pouring 3 years of love and gratitude and impossible joy into that connection. "I'm proud of you, for changing, for choosing this path, for being the kind of father and husband I never dreamed I'd have when I walked into your office that first day." "I'm proud of us," Sebastian corrected, "for surviving, for fighting, for refusing to let circumstances define us. You saved me, Lucia, from becoming my father, from losing what little humanity I had left, from a life of isolation and violence. You and Elena are my redemption." They sat there in the quiet of the office, two people who'd started as strangers bound by contract and become partners bound by choice. Outside, Chicago glittered in the darkness, a city that had witnessed their unlikely journey from transaction to trust, from fear to love, from obligation to devotion. The empire remained, transformed but still standing. The danger had receded but never fully disappeared. That was the nature of Sebastian's world, his history, his name. But they'd learned to navigate it together, to protect what mattered, to build a life that honored both who they'd been and who they were becoming. And when Sebastian carried Lucia to bed that night, when they made love with the easy familiarity of 3 years of choosing each other, when they fell asleep tangled together in the bed they now shared without question, it was with the certainty that they'd found something rare and precious. They'd found love in the last place either of them expected. They'd found partnership in what should have been imprisonment. They'd found family in what began as a business transaction. The contract that forced them together had burned to ash 3 years ago. But the vows they made to each other every single day, to choose love, to fight for their family, to be partners in every sense of the word, those vows were stronger than any contract could ever be. Because in the end, Sebastian had been right about one thing. The moment he'd chosen mercy over power, restraint over force, humanity over monstrosity, that had changed everything. And Lucia had been right too. All anyone could do was try to be decent in indecent situations and hope it was enough. For them, it had been more than enough. It had been everything.